And we're live. Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Holding Court with the Empress West Hollywood. My name's Enoch Miller, your Empress of WeHo, and we're excited to have with us today. We want to give a special thank you to our amazing producers, GayLifeLA.com, and as well to our weekly sponsor, Training Mate Los Angeles. Training Mate is a company if you want to get fit and lit in the West Hollywood, Studio City, and Santa Monica area. They have locations out there. It's a great way to get fun in training programs with some cheeky humor to boot. You can go check them out at trainingmate.com for more information and get that summer body on today. I want to give a special thank you to my amazing guest, Mr. Andre Perez. Yay! Thank you. We're so excited. I mean, if you guys had known the litany of BS we had to deal with to get him here. With the recordings and everything, and I thank him so much for your patience, Andre. But welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Super excited. So, Andre, I'd like to get jumping right on in with you, and then just talk about kind of your upbringing. You're originally from kind of the Virginia and North Carolina area, and you grew up all around there. What was it like for you, kind of living on the East Coast and everything, and you've traveled on a little bit more in the U.S. What's kind of your experience overall with your growing up in kind of that east part of the USA?
Yeah, I mean, I think about my upbringing as being like the nexus of conservatism, right? Like my mom was in the military.
Oh, wow.
I grew up in the South, and my mom's like a Southern Baptist. So it's like all of the kinds of conservative that you can be kind of rolled into one, you know? So I think that, as a queer person, right, like that was difficult. And I think in a lot of ways, I couldn't have imagined, who I've become now, because there was just no way to do that in the place that I was. So, yeah, and that, I mean, I feel like it's also kind of interesting to be from a military town, because it's like, I say I'm from a place that no one's from. So, I think that in a lot of ways I don't have the same feeling of like rootedness or like the same relationship to home. And, and I think that having moved around a lot, it really, in some ways, it was difficult, but also I think that it really helped me become who I am, right? Like it forces you to be outgoing and to be the kind of person who can relate to many different kinds of people and many different situations. So, so that's why, I'll talk to anyone, I'll ask anyone anything. And that's basically what I need to be a documentary filmmaker. So
that's true, so very true, and I totally can relate. I mean, my dad was a minister, Southern Baptist minister, traveled a lot, was missionaries, all that crazy shit. So totally relate to, again, the family being very conservative, very strict, kind of very controlling. Obviously, trying to be of who you are as an individual and your entire life. Crazy. And just for your experience, because so your mom was in the military, and your what did your father do? Was he just kind of, was he a house dad, or like what was his kind of role in your life through that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up not knowing my father, so like many people, I didn't really know my father. I did have a stepfather at some point, and he was pretty much a dick. So.
That's not a start.
Lots of models of toxic masculinity and what not to be. But I actually did end up meeting my father later in my life when I was like 20. So that's during what I dubbed my telenovela summer. So one day you'll see that coming to a screen near you.
Yeah, well, that should be fun. I'd love to see a good telenovela. They always get that, that Latin spice in there. And you're also natively Puerto Rican as well, so you've got the flavor for sure, which is amazing. And so with growing up with primarily your mom and kind of her influence, when you finally did come out to her, what was her initial reaction to you? Was it a positive one, or did it take some time for her to kind of grasp everything?
Yeah, I mean, my mom, it's kind of funny. There were two, she's going to hate that I say these things, but there were kind of two different ones I think about. Like there's like, on the one hand, my little brother is 15 years younger than me.
Okay.
And so, he was the one who really, like, I think my mother is very much like, raised me in this way of like, don't talk about things, don't talk about your personal life, And my little brother sort of not knowing any better, or, was the one to ask all the big questions, and that
cool.
So my little brother was about 7, and I was tucking him in, and I was visiting from college, and I had been trying to bring it up to my mom, but she was like studiously avoiding noticing things. And I was kind of being avoidant, I guess, in some ways. I'd be like, "Hey, Mom, I have these boxers to wash," like hoping that she would be like, "Why do you wear boxers?" But no, she was not going to ask that. I even told her I changed my name, and she's like, "Oh, what's your new name?" And I'm like, "Andre." And she's like, "Oh, how do you spell that?" And it's like, did I just come out or what? I came out like 10 times. They don't understand. But my little brother, I was like tucking him in. I was reading him this little children's book about like Cesar Chavez and like the strike. And then he's like, I have a question. And I totally thought I was going to get to do my little like communist political education, And I'm like, what? And he's like, why do you look like a boy? And why do you talk like a boy? And why do you dress like a boy? Do you want to be a boy? And I'm like, it's funny you should ask that question. So, we don't give children credit. Children really, I think, understand a lot more of what's going on at some intuitive level,
It's scary how much and it's honestly, they're the ones that will just, fucking say whatever, and it just comes right out of their mouths. But it's really great that the fact that he recognized that and acknowledged the fact that you were someone different and you were looking like your authentic self. And it's so crazy how a child was able to do that. And honestly, I totally relate to with when you have a Latina mother, when it comes into the whole, like, they don't say anything, they avoid situations, like, we don't talk about anything. My grandmother's the same way. She's from Mexico, and it's the same thing. It's very much, they do not talk about it, and they try to bury everything underneath with just don't say anything. You just do what you want to do, but don't talk to anyone else about it. It's very true.
Incidentally, when he was 15, he would be like, why do you act so gay? And I was like, well, actually, it's funny you should ask that, because I am gay. And that was a whole nother, that's another tangent, but that just like blew my mom's mind. I'm like, yeah. Well, she's like, why are you at this drag show on Facebook? And I'm like, because I'm kind of gay, Mom. Which was not news to anyone in the world other than her. But
wow. Oh, this is still. It's like great, and it's honestly really great that you're kind of showing her how all this works and really kind of bringing her along with your story, and the fact that she still is somewhat open to it. The fact that she hasn't completely shut you out of her life. That's what's really encouraging to hear, that she still at least talks to you and wants to have that relationship. But yeah, a total Latina mother is just like, no, we're not going to talk about it. Well, just you do you, and then it's so funny to see that. So growing up, then you go to school, and you're kind of trying to, because I've read something on here that said from a very early age you were very attuned to also seeing things that you perceived to be wrong, or that you were just observing and listening to a lot of other people and going like, oh my gosh, this is even though this is why people think this is the way things are, why can't they change, and how do we do to make that change? From your perspective, what was it like kind of seeing a lot of like maybe an injustice or things you would see growing up that really kind of made you more attuned to some of the issues that go on in our country's day-to-day life?
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny because I did grow up in this really conservative environment, and so, my political views are very different than my mother's, right? But I just think I've always just been someone to ask questions, and just like, I'm like, why is it that way? And like, why can't it be different? And so I just feel like that, I don't know, there was always that questioning part of me, and and there was a certain point where people started just being like, oh, you should go to the north, like people that kind of think the way that you do, or think about the things that you do. They live in Massachusetts, which I think meant that like people thought I was gay, because like being gay was like legal or something there. And so that would be the thing, is like, oh, you should really go to Massachusetts. So that's kind of how I found myself going to college in the Northeast, was that people had kind of implied that was where people who think like me live, and I didn't even know what that was. I just so yeah, I don't know. I guess just it's hard to know where things come from, but I just feel like I'm always the first one to just be upset and just be like, well, why? I think still in a lot of ways to be like, okay, we can complain about something, but what are we going to do about it? And who are we going to find who's like just as angry as we are? I was like, kind of that little like organizer spirit as a kid when I was like, recess should be longer. What's wrong with people?
You're a rebel from the beginning. I love it. And so you went to college, and that was Marlborough College over in Vermont. And so you did that, and you did gender studies and then media education. And going into that, were you initially hoping to combine the two, or what was like when you went for that degree? What was your intent on hoping to take it after college, and then when you graduated?
Yeah, I mean, I chose my I was a first generation college student.
Oh, awesome.
So I didn't really understand what colleges were in a lot of ways. It's kind of like school, it's better, it's your own thing. And so I did all these kind of personality tests in order to sort of figure out where to go. And the college I chose because it was self-directed. And I'd always been someone who had really big ideas and like these big projects. Oh, I want college to be like a big project where you get to like figure out how to make big things happen. Okay. And so that's the college I chose. So it was basically structured like a master's program. Oh, awesome. You ended up writing this sort of undergraduate thesis and working on a big project. And so my project that I decided to do was that I wanted to start interviewing trans people. I started looking at different archives, like the Sexual Minorities Archive in Western Massachusetts, lesbian archives, all these LGBT history books, and trans people weren't in them. Or if they were in them, they were sort of edited over, right? Like Sylvia Rivera was portrayed as a gay man under her male name. And so I was like, well, how is it that trans people are new? Like, why? Like, how are we new? How is it that we've never existed before? Right. And is that authentic, you know? And so that's when I was like, I want to go meet trans elders, because I even on like a private level, right? Like I wanted to understand, what will it be like to grow up to be trans? Like like there were so many questions I had in my mind. I wanted to understand where people had been and who had walked that path. And so that's how I started. And then I got involved in the New England Transgender Pride March, which is the first transgender pride march on the East Coast, I think. Wow. And so I met all these elders that, actually Miss Major was flown out there. And so I got to meet like, all these people who would become my heroes, right? And I was like, oh, we need to record people's stories. Because also, Miss Major was ill. Leslie Feinberg was ill. There were a lot of people who had done amazing things, but it was clear to me that we might have them for a long time, or we might not.
Right, very true.
And so that's when I started recording oral histories, and I just really wanted to capture these conversations that were so meaningful to me, and to share them on the burgeoning internet that was not what the internet is now, right? This is before you could post like if you posted a 1-minute video on like YouTube, you would that was like the max, So we would cut it into like a bunch of 1-minute videos to try to post it, but it's like an hour-long conversation, so that's totally absurd.
Wow. 60 videos.
So that's how the Trans Oral History Project started.
That's amazing.
And
so you started that roughly around 2008, right before you graduated college. So you were in the process of finishing your degree and starting this project, which is, a huge undertaking. When you first got into it, you kind of mentioned briefly that again, your mindset was going into trying to capture all these stories, to preserve this history, to preserve these people's their lives and their legacy. And when you're kind of going about figuring out how to go from like A to Z and really start to finish putting everything together, what was your initial process of going, okay, I'm going to find this list of people? Like, how did you go about kind of figuring out, let's go like step by step, the individual, how did you go about finding kind of what to record on? Video obviously was part of it. And then how did you kind of go about making sure this was getting out? And I know you mentioned YouTube, but was there other platforms to which you used to get this out to people? Was it just specifically shown through the transgender community, or was it shown to other parts of the LGBT community as well? So let's kind of start from the beginning. How did you kind of find that list of individuals? Or did you just put out a broadcast saying, hey, anyone that would like to submit, please submit to us?
Yeah, I came very much from like the zine kind of world. And so lots of sort of like, hey, if you want to share your story, let me know.
Right.
And as I traveled, I got the opportunity to travel for different things, for conferences or for work, or as I was moving across the country.
Right.
I would just put out, hey, if there are any trans people in Seattle who want to be interviewed, talk to me. And so that's how I met people, and that was at a point when there wasn't very much, there were no beacons, I guess, of trans community in a lot of ways, right? Trans people were like just really hungry to connect with folks. And so people just hit me up and we would have coffee and we would record. And I mean, it's kind of wild because like, it's just me like being 20 years old and just being like, hey, I want to talk to people and I don't know anyone, like come talk to me. And people were so grateful. Because, I think what I didn't realize at the beginning was that, because I was like, oh, who am I? I'm just like some kid with a camera.
Right.
But, I think for a lot of folks, they had never been told their story was important. And a lot of people were like, oh, especially elders were like, oh, why do you want to record my story? Like, it's not important. I'm just, you're young. Like, life is life. Don't waste your life talking to old fogies like me. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? You've done amazing things. Like how, like I think so many people just hadn't really been approached in a way as if the things that they did were important. But to me, that made it all the more important to kind of share with people how much it mattered to me and so many other people, So I recorded all these stories. I ultimately put together a history exhibition that was archival material, zines, self-published works, and then videos. And we broke it into the different decades of transgender activism. So that showed at my college in like a gallery space, but we also did it at the Translating Identities Conference at UVM. And then, there were other people who wanted to be a part of the project. So we became a collective. And then we ultimately had different chapters in different places. We had a strong Philadelphia contingent. They contributed to a big citywide exhibition around the anniversary of the Dewey Counter lunch riots. And so, because trans people had kind of been left out of this sort of celebration of the LGBT history, and so they came strong and were like, "Hey, we want to record local history." So they managed to record the story of one of the people who was the founder of the Philly Trans Health Conference.
Oh wow! Holy crap!
Within a year of when she actually passed away, ultimately. So
that's amazing.
Yeah. So, and I just think, so there are certain interviews that really stick out to me from that period. Like I was able to interview one of the first Casica Queens, which is a Puerto Rican transgender beauty pageant that happens in the Humboldt Park neighborhood of Chicago. And so Reina Valentina was one of the first to win that honor. And, I was able to interview her in the final year of her life. So, I just think it's, like I said, it's important. And, and it's funny, we actually haven't done a lot with those interviews. Now there are these large institutions that are getting these giant grants to record histories. And so it just felt like, I guess that's how it always is, right? Like there's the grassroots work that the community does for free because you love it. And then there's a point where that ideally can become more institutionalized. So it just felt like it wasn't, we're not trying to compete to record oral histories. So, but I don't know. I feel like one day I'd like to go and make a book out of the interviews because I have over 100 of them. And I think it'll be like the longitudinal, like I think Studs Terkel, how it really his work captures like a moment in American history that's like from all these different levels. And so I would like to do something like that at some point. So
that'd be really cool, and especially all those different viewpoints as well from even 3 or 4 people in that same time period. Their perspectives are probably completely different, which would be amazing to hear how each one of them handled whatever period of time that was during American history. And it's very, you do bring up a very great point in the fact that, especially in the community here for the LGBT community, a lot of people do not pay homage to the fact that the trans community have been one of the forefronts of LGBT rights and activism way before a lot of gay, lesbian, and bisexual individuals got involved, because really we were too scared to. And quite frankly, the trans community had to fight twice as hard to get the same rights and to try and get the same level of respect, not just from the community outside and then outside of the LGBT community, but even from within. Like you're saying, you're kind of the trans community felt like he was being pushed under the rug. They were treated like the redheaded stepchild. It was really not given the respect and honor that they deserved, again, through paving so much for LGBT rights as a whole. And it's really, it's sad to see that, that it was like that. I feel we are getting back to representing our trans community a little bit better, hopefully. And you can attest to if you've seen that kind of swing back around and it being more celebrated. What's your perspective on that? Do you feel it's being a little bit more accepted through the LGBT community, or is it still kind of fighting to make sure that you guys are getting the respect you deserve and you're not like vying for attention with everyone else?
It's both and, right? Okay. Like, I think that, like you said, like, I agree. Like, Sylvia Rivera was one of the people who actually stormed the stage at the first Christopher Street Parade, which was the precursor to Pride.
Right,
and
exactly.
She delivered this like amazing speech that like could be a speech of like any, like Bambi Salcedo could give that speech today. It was like, one day, this event that we started with our blood and our risk, we're the ones who are homeless and we're dying in the streets and we have HIV. And one day there are going to be white gay men who take leadership in these organizations and institutions, but they're not going to be invested in our community, and they're going to leave us behind because it's going to be easier to fight for their rights and leave ours behind. And when that happens, they're going to kick us out of their bars, and they're going to kick us out of the parade that was founded because of what we did. And it's like, fast forward, oh my God, Sylvia. Like, if I could resurrect her and talk to her about this moment, I think what would she say, right?
Yeah.
Maybe she would just not be that surprised. She'd be like,
no,
I told you.
It is, and it's so very true. And I feel like other media sources like Pose has been very good in showcasing that point, and the fact that even back in the 80s, where when that one scene when she's trying to go and just have a drink at a gay bar, and they literally throw her on her ass, because there's like, oh, you don't belong here, you're not part of us. And it had nothing to do with her being Black, it had everything to do with her being trans. And that was just, again, even as far back as the 80s, even during this whole Stonewall and everything with that, there was still issues. And I feel like it is getting better, but it's still not at all the place with our own community where it should be, and us respecting each other equally as much as we want the rest of the world to respect us equally. So I definitely agree that there is this education that needs to go on first within our own neighborhood and our own selves before it can really be done right to the rest of the world, basically. And really,
and I'm encouraged really to see. I do think things are changing, right? I think they're not changing fast enough, but they're absolutely shifting. And I think that we are seeing so much more of an explosion of visibility around the trans community right now that, frankly, has there's good and bad to that, right? Like, we're also seeing this huge backlash. But I think, it's in a lot of ways, it's a better time to be trans than it's ever been. And I think that the fact that all this tension and this conflict is on the surface, I feel like we're actually really making big strides, and we're going through the difficult part of change, right? That's like tumultuous and painful and sad. But all too often, the people who pay the price for that are people of color and Black trans women and sex workers. And, I think that, unfortunately, the gains are being made more for people who are white or white passing, and trans men than they are for trans women, in all these different ways. So I think within every community, it's always like, how do we make sure that we're supporting and uplifting and encouraging leadership from the parts of our community that are getting left behind? Because there's always someone who's not getting as represented,
Right. Exactly, and I think it's just like a growing pains kind of thing. Exactly like you said, it's just us learning how to do better tomorrow and the next day and the next day after that, and just working toward just being better overall. And you're right, it's a struggle, but I feel like you are right. We are getting better. We are trying to be more inclusive of each other and making sure we give everyone the appropriate amount of space to talk, to share their whatever story that is, to share their purview, to share everything like that. And I feel like you're right. It is getting better. It's just there's still so much more we could do to be better on this. And especially when it comes to media now and queer content, it's been really encouraging to see platforms such as Reverie TV, who you partnered with to do America in Transition, and organizations like that are dedicated to queer content specifically, and giving queer individuals an opportunity to connect and find resources through either videos, series, YouTube, talk shows, all these different things that Reverie provides. For you, have you been really encouraged to see the level of media now available to queer, not just individuals, but also queer youth and people looking toward understanding more about the LGBTQ plus community? What has been your either excitement or just kind of experience now with what this has been available here in the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's amazing. Like when I think about even just on every level, like to me, I think a lot about how the internet facilitates trans community.
Right.
And that's part of why I was really committed to having a digital series as opposed to necessarily being on a traditional broadcaster.
Okay.
Was because I'm like, actually, the internet enables us to connect across geography and to connect with these other people who are in some ways like niche, right? Like, so this idea like, oh, trans people are what? 2 or 3%. So that's 3 people per 100. But we're all spread out. We don't come from trans families necessarily, right? We don't have the ability to network and find elders and have those multi-generational connections in the ways that other marginalized communities do that really helps build resilience. And so the internet is the way that people do that. And it's, I think about all these younger people who are like, talking about their transitions on YouTube.
Yes.
And being able to like share information and, so I just think it's so important. Everything from that to this space of like, well, how do we talk to mainstream America, whatever that is? To me, it's about like, how do we have media that speaks to people in their own language? And so that's part of the idea of America in Transition was that, trans people come from every culture, every society. And so it's like the fact that, Z, who's sort of a typical Marine kind of dude, he can go and he can talk to veterans in a way that like I can't. Like they look at me and they're like, who's this faggot, right? But at the same time, I can talk to I can talk to Puerto Rican folks, or I can talk to gay trans men, I can talk to different parts of the community from my perspective and my position, and have a way that I can really connect authentically with people. So to me, that's what America in Transition was always about, was like, how do we create a platform? How do we uplift different kinds of trans experiences in ways that are culturally specific? And how do we talk about things beyond sort of the quote being trans, how do we talk about culture and society and our Latinidad and all these other nuanced immigration, all these other nuanced aspects of trans experience. Yeah. And then like, how do we get people into spaces? So one of the things I've most enjoyed in this process is that we actually host a lot of screenings at colleges or universities or community centers. And even like while we were a work in progress, we would do that, and we would host workshops, lectures, and discussions around, being gender variants in the Latino community, or growing up trans in the South, or Ain't I Trans, like Black American views on trans experience, or like we have had all these different kinds of ways of kind of driving the conversation.
Yeah,
that's important to me. Is it's not even just right? It's like, how do we create experiences where people are in community kind of grappling with some of these bigger issues, right? Because I think that's where we have the potential to really change, like win hearts and minds, or really change society or social norms. And, is like the fact that when you can, like one of our screenings was in a church, actually over the Trans Day of Visibility, when we had 40 plus screenings. It was in the church where we filmed, right? With a trans reference.
That's so cool.
And so it's just like, how do we get church folks talking about like, what does it mean to be a Christian and to support people who are being attacked and marginalized in our society, right? Because I think, sure, the religious right, the radicals have sort of taken that space from us as queer people, but the reality is like, why do we have to seat that moral authority? Like, I think that actually I would rather sit down with someone who's like who genuinely wants to be a good person.
Yes.
And I'd rather talk to them about, what it means to me to be a good person and figure out if we can find a place in the middle of dignity and respect. Like, I have more inspiration around that conversation than I do necessarily like, going into the club or, these other kind of spaces where sort of typically, are more trans, but maybe aren't really as values driven. So it's like, how do we talk about values?
And that's what I really appreciate about this series is the fact that, like you said, it really hits on such many, it's like so many different topics, instead of just also talking about people and their struggles through either an experience or with family, or like you said, with religious and all that stuff. And it really also hits other things like again, through generational stuff, through people of color. And it takes so many different issues and really packs a lot of different topics to talk about through these 4 stories, and really kind of gives you so many different things you can relate to. And you don't necessarily have to be trans, you don't have to be black, you don't have to be this, you don't have to be that. There's so many different nuggets you can pull from this that help you relate to it and find a commonality. And I think you did such a good job of giving everyone, I think, that would watch this some way to find a relatable aspect to it, which I feel like that's kind of the goal you were hoping to have with this. And it's very pointed, I think, through that. For anyone who doesn't know, the series is a 4-episode series. It's on Reverie.tv right now. It's called America in Transition, and I'm just going to read. So this is a documentary series exploring relationships, community, and social issues with trans people of color. You guys travel across the U.S. to capture real life of a veteran turned activist, a woman living with HIV who's healing from trauma, and a model navigating family. And so this is just a really amazing. It's also an award-winning documentary through Sundance. So congratulations on that too. And just starting from the very beginning on this, what inspired you to create this series specifically, and why you chose the 4 stories you chose, the individuals you chose to do that? What was that initial start to that? I mean, obviously you have the Transgender Oral History Project, so this is kind of a spin-off-ish from that. So what really inspired you to take on this undergoing?
Yeah, I mean, to me, what inspired me? Yeah, I mean, like I said, like I'm trans, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm from the South. There was a period, I guess, I've done all these interviews. I ultimately got hired for StoryCorps, which was my dream job. I was like, oh my God, I was such a little nerd, right? I was like, oh my God, I want to work for an oral history project, but it's like not a sort of stuffy institutional oral history project, right? It's more of like this populist, community programming centered kind of oral history. And so I did that for 3 years, and it was incredible. Helped launch the Chicago booth. And so so we ended up, I interviewed over 600 people. About 50 segments were broadcast on NPR, and either locally or nationally. And so that was great. Like, I think to see the scale of that, and to have this like amazing opportunity to record stories, and to have them archived in the Library of Congress or the Smithsonian African American History Museum, to say like, oh, this is important to our community, and that's what makes it part of history, right? The history is not something sort of abstract. It's not some battles. It's like, what is the fabric of our society, and how have we changed? How have we become who we are? And so even though that work was really meaningful, I felt like I still had a strong sort of personal perspective. I felt like the ways that the trans community was getting represented were kind of missing, missing different aspects, right? It was very white-centered, and that, like Laverne Cox was on the cover of Time magazine, and they were like, oh, it's the transgender tipping point. And I was like, I don't feel like we're like, there's this idea that, because I think, this goes back to that idea of like an echo chamber, right? Like people in New York or LA were maybe feeling like, oh, like everyone knows about trans stuff and like people are down. But I was like, well, I come from a place and I feel like people are not having the same kind of conversations, And so that's when I left my job, which is terrifying. And I was like, I want to do the same work, but I want to do it for my community, because I feel like if we have the next 3 years, 5 years of sort of being in the media spotlight, and if that's the amount of time we have to really move consciousness of people and to really define what are trans issues in the popular imagination, then I really wanted to make sure that I was doing what I could in order to make sure that that was a conversation that brought people from diverse communities to the table, and that was, that there were a lot of different kinds of experiences when we thought of trans, that we were busting that open instead of keeping it narrow. So that's why I left to do that. And, like you said, Sundance sort of came on board early on and gave some seed money and was really supportive in many ways. And that was incredible. And and so I just sort of started traveling around the country trying to talk to different trans people. I joined a lot of Facebook groups and was just kind of seeing who was speaking up in different forums or chat rooms, or what people were talking about and what seemed to be really important. And then I gathered together a community advisory board with people that I really respected and admired from the movement. So, people from the Trans Latino Coalition and Black Trans Man Inc. and these other like emerging POC-led organizations. Because I was like, what do you feel like? I asked them a question. What do you feel? What stories need to be told? Okay. What stories never need to be told again? And who do you know that you think would be amazing on camera? Yeah. And so, we batted around a bunch of stories. We were like, we want to see more trans families and trans kids, and we want to see trans people with disabilities and transgender immigrants. And we don't feel like people understand HIV criminalization. Like, we feel like people don't think about prison and what that means for trans people. And so we had this huge range of ideas. And then I kind of set out, it's definitely an art and not a science. I set out to try to find people whose stories maybe roughly matched up with the different themes or identities or ideas, and then, proposed to people. And so found out who was really game to make this a reality. So
great. So let's go through each kind of episode. I mean, there's 4, so we can kind of go through them pretty quickly. But let's kind of break down what inspired each one, and then we'll kind of go 1 through 4, and then you can kind of give us your feedback on kind of how you came about setting up that particular episode, and then the content you put in with it, and then kind of how, because each one's roughly about like half an hour ish.
Yeah. They're like 20, 25 minutes.
Yeah, something to that effect. Okay. And so it's not like long, but still it's a lot of information to put in there as well too. So the first one is I'm really going to read this description. After growing up misunderstood in India, Nina fell in love with another trans woman in the U.S. Facing the threat of deportation, Nina and her love continue to fight for space to live and to flourish where no place feels safe. And they, if I'm correct, they are both the founders of the Trans Lifeline.
Yes.
They're co-founders of the Trans Lifeline. Okay, so how did you get in touch with them, and then how did they become a part of this first episode?
So, that was the episode that from the beginning, I kind of dubbed in my mind like the immigration episode, right? Okay. I was like, I really would love to feature an immigrant, maybe talk about being undocumented. Like, I've done a lot of work in the LGBT Latino community in Chicago. And so, I feel very indebted to a lot of folks who are Mexican and who have this experience of being undocumented. And so I really wanted to try to support people. It was very difficult to find, at first I was inspired by how the undocuqueer movement and the Immigrant Youth Justice League were doing all of this, their strategy was come out of the closets, don't be, be visible, don't let them silence you.
Right.
But I think in some ways that can make you more safe, but then in certain ways that can make you more targeted, right?
Yeah, I totally can see both. Yeah.
And so I think over the course of the series, right? Remember, 2015 is kind of when we started shooting or planning the series. And it just became, the war on immigrants has just escalated, right? And
Wow.
so now people are more targeted for being activists. And after Trump got elected, you know, people who we've been talking to about being featured really backed down and were like, look, I don't want to put myself at risk. I don't want to put my family at risk.
Totally
which, you know, we didn't want to put people at risk either. And it just, there's a point where it just felt too risky.
Right.
And so, because, you know, the worst thing that I would want would be that being involved in the project would have a negative outcome, you know, for someone.
Right. Or to accidentally cause them to be deported. I mean, you would never want something like, wow.
So, you know, I had been involved with the Trans Lifeline. I was the first person that Greta and Nina hired, actually. So I helped raise money to build it from being, you know, $80,000 a year organization to $500,000. And so it was, you know, I was close with them, and obviously I knew a lot about their work. And it's kind of funny. There's times, you know, when I think that it's like the answer's right in front of your face. And so that
always.
That was the final episode, and I was sort of being like, man, I wish we could have a story that was about immigration, but that didn't involve putting anyone at risk. And I wish that, you know, my Spanish is así. I thought my Spanish was better than it was, and then when we filmed in Spanish, I realized that like it wasn't so great.
Oh, I'm right there with you. I can only know how to curse well in Spanish, and that's about it.
Exactly. So I was like, if only someone spoke English, I would love to have more queer representation.
Right.
And, you know, they were in this unique position, and I was like, oh, Nina is everything I've ever wanted. Like, Nina, will you please be in my documentary? And I think it took her a while to come to a place of being able to share her story. So I think we kind of both met in the middle at the same place to say like, oh, this is important. Let's do it.
Perfect. And I mean, it's a beautiful story, and it's very, I mean, it really kind of shows you not just the struggle of, like you said, of being a trans woman, but also the struggle of being just an immigrant and the fight you have to do day in and day out to make sure you can, again, just be in a country that you enjoy and love. And it's really beautiful. So it's Nina and Greta, correct? And they met early on and everything with that. And so when it went about going and putting this together and finishing the full episode, your focus was just mainly on the immigration aspect, or what other parts did you want to focus on through to really help people understand, or was it specifically a trans woman or a trans individual going like that was from another country trying to be in the US and the immigration issues they had to deal with?
I mean, yeah, I think also part of what appealed to me about Nina's story was the fact that she is this person who's not, like, I didn't want to portray trans people as victims, right? And so I was really excited about the fact that she had this project going on, and that she in general is this very dynamic person who has all these, like, is very... has all these different interesting projects, and so we end up talking about, so the episode, it's funny, in a lot of ways became less about immigration and then more about her life after detention, and and like this community that she's building. But I really just felt like it spoke to kind of this current moment that we're in of like uncertainty and precarity for so many marginalized people, and in a way that someone is, you know, trying to take back that power in their own lives, right?
And it's so very poignant for today's community and society, and I think it relates so much to people today because of that. And I think I can totally see people, I mean, understanding the struggle, especially with what's happened the last couple of years, with everything, and again that she's had in office. Well, crap with that. Okay, so we'll go on to the next episode, episode 2, and it's I'm gonna butcher this. Can you help me with his name? DeJorn. Okay. So he's a family man, a model, an advocate. Even as he drew national attention, he hid his gender identity from his mom. Now they're trying to understand one another before it's too late. And his mother, I don't want to give too much away, which is so hard to be vague when you're trying to be enough. But his mother is ill, and there's some complications with that. And so he's trying to find a way to, again, be his authentic self with her, but afraid of, again, what her reaction might be. How did you what was the purpose behind this story, and then kind of what message did you want to convey to everyone through it?
Yeah, I mean, I think with any documentary, there's like the starting point, and then there's the ending point, and sometimes they are far from one another. In terms of the story arc. And so, yeah, so I mean, I started out by being like, oh, I want someone who's kind of a more role model. Like you said, like I said, I wanted someone who doesn't necessarily sort of exemplify a social issue, right? But it's more of just who they are, and that they're someone who's doing something that's cool and interesting, right? And groundbreaking in our community. And so that's how I've found DeJorn. I mean, he's been amazing to work with. I think he might have actually pitched himself to me, which is something that I didn't realize would happen, but actually now is kind of a regular thing. People kind of pitch themselves to me, and I wish I could record and like make content about all the stories. So that's why when people are like, "Oh, do you think you could do a second season?" I'm like, I could easily do 10 seasons. Find me the money, and I've got 9 more seasons for you. So when I started getting to know him, really immediately what came out was that what was important to him was his family, and then that his mother was ill, and so we totally just trashed our initial. We were gonna do something in 2 months, and then we were, and we trashed our initial thing because stuff was going down, and we rented a car that I didn't know how to drive, and we drove to California or to Milwaukee from Chicago.
Wow.
Yeah, it was. I'm really glad that we did that because she did ultimately die not very long after.
Well, it's amazing though you were able to capture that before, because I'm just like, especially again, this is not like, so I mean, anyone doesn't watching this that doesn't realize this is a documentary. This is not something where you can take 1, take 20, and like cut and do on later. I mean, you've got to get this stuff now as quickly as you can, especially for someone that is in a life or death situation. Which is, I mean, it's sorry to hear that she passed away so soon after that, but I'm glad you guys were able to capture that moment between them. And again, I don't want to, this is so hard not to spoil anything because it's so cool. Anyway, okay, before I like stick my foot in it, because again, referee.tv would watch it. Okay, so the third one is Tiomi. Tiomi, okay, good. Tiomi's worst fear comes true. She struggles to reconnect with the bold, adventurous woman she has always been against a backdrop of self-imposed isolation. And then this one, I feel like, to me, this one was just kind of a really intense one, and it was just, it wasn't necessarily hard to watch, but I think it hit a lot of, like little personal buttons. What was the intent behind this and the message you wanted to convey through this episode with Tiomi?
Yeah. I mean, Tiomi was, like I said, I joined because specifically I was really interested in rural communities.
Right.
And I was really interested in like, how do we tell the story that's not being told? And so I was in all these different Facebook groups and sort of trying to see what were people talking about. And Tiomi just kept posting, like I was just like, all right, I don't know. Like there may only be 10 trans people in Arkansas, but Tiomi is definitely, the person who is very robust and outspoken, and has like strong perspectives and is very like, has a lot of great things to say. And so I contacted her and was like, hey, I'm doing this project. I'm looking to connect with people. Who do you think should be in my series? And she was like, well, me, of course. No, I mean, she was great. And that was the first one that we filmed, actually. So that was zero budget. I hitched a ride with someone who was going to Mississippi to help someone get an abortion. As you know, they've shut down all the abortion clinics in Mississippi.
Oh, right. Oh, my God, right.
So there was a pregnancy scare, and I was like, I will bring a bucket of condoms, and I will drive half of the way, and we can sleep on this woman's couch I've been talking to on the internet.
Oh, my God.
And that was how we filmed that episode. So, very much a community effort. And I mean, I just immediately felt like I talked to Tiomi, I think I called her and I talked to her for 4 hours the first day. And I just I knew it was going to be her, she was just really like the way that she speaks is very sort of poetic in a way, is very insightful and poignant. And, Yeah, and so I just was immediately like, she had a really horrible story, unfortunately. And I was like, no, this is definitely something that people need to know about. We need to do this right now.
Exactly. And I think that one honestly really really relates to a lot of people in the community as a whole, especially with the issues that she deals with. I think it's very relatable, and I think that's why so many things about it can like hit so many individuals specifically, especially just because so much I can't say because I want you to watch the show. Oh, it's horrible. I am so bad at like keeping. Don't tell me secrets ever because I am such a fucking blabbermouth because I will itch me to death to not say. Okay, so before I ruin anything more, so episode 4, and this is Z. He's had this issue of his family and his church rejecting him. He becomes a Marine that he's always wanted to be. His life is upended, and he becomes an unlikely activist. And then he is searching for love and belonging amongst the rising political tensions. And this, again, very applicable to what's going on, especially with Trump's trying to really dismiss the trans community's support to military and activism, and really just dismissing their contributions to keeping our country safe. And so what was kind of obviously representing the trans community in the military was kind of the main theme, but what also did you want people to kind of garner from Z's story and what he had to offer?
Yeah, it's funny. I definitely did not set out to record his story because he had been in the military. And that was very much, that's when I said, sometimes there's the point of origination and then your destination.
Right.
I was interested in Z's story, who actually incidentally had also worked for the Trans Lifeline.
Oh, okay.
He answered over 500 hours of suicide calls.
Wow.
And so I was drawn to, I'm always drawn to contradictions. Okay. So I was drawn to the fact that he was in many ways like every man I grew up with, like sort of this kind of maybe toxic masculinity and this like very like tough, outer shell and, sort of be a Marine, like don't have feelings. And, but then also was like this deeply feelingsy man, right? Like is totally out here, like doing this incredible support work in the community. And so it was like that combination of being kind of hard and soft at the same time. And then also in a lot of ways being just being very culturally sort of Southern and Christian, and which is something that people don't expect from our community. But then the ways that he kind of figures out how to navigate those spaces with the complexity of who he is as an indigenous person and as a Latino person, and as a child of an immigrant, and and so that's what I was drawn to. And he just wouldn't stop talking about being in the military, and I was like, yeah. I guess we'll just record it and we'll just edit it out later. And and then all this stuff happened around the military, so suddenly, the fact that he had been kicked out under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, 10 years ago seemed really irrelevant, 3 years ago. But today it seems really relevant because of what's going on.
Exactly.
With trans people in the military. So there's some things that so it's kind of, so I thought of his story as being about HB2, but more so about like being an activist in the South and being someone who's firmly committed to his Southernness and to staying in the South. Because I think so many of the narratives are like, oh, you got to get out, like,
true.
And people will even say things like that to me, like, oh, you got out. And I'm like, I don't feel that way about it. Like, I feel like I'm pursuing opportunities that are incredible that I wouldn't have had there. But I also think that I miss the South. Like when I set out to do this, I wanted to connect with people who were the kind of people that I would hang out with now, but living where I used to live. Because, just because my experience was very isolating, but that's because I didn't have the language around or the freedom to connect with other queer people. And I thought, what would it be like to go back and connect with queer organizations like Southerners on New Ground, who's briefly featured in that episode, There are these like radical queer organizations that have been building these like enduring community ties. There's something really beautiful to me about showcasing, and that's kind of one of the goals that I had for the series, and I wish I would definitely like to explore more of in different seasons, is just showing queer communities that are deeply rooted in more rural spaces, because they are there, and I think that there's just an incredibly different way that people can come together in that kind of environment. So,
right. And I think it's very true. A lot of the times they just don't even know they're there or the options even available. And it's like half the time it's just getting them that information to be able to find those spaces, because a lot of times they're very scared to even say anything, because what would happen if someone heard or overheard or like that. And it does create this environment of fear. But it's amazing to see that there are organizations out there that are really reaching out to let you know you have a safe space, you have a place where you can come and be authentically you, and we want to celebrate you and hopefully give you an opportunity to meet other people as well. So it's great that, and again, I think Z's story has really hit so many different topics all at once. Obviously, the military thing being very poignant, and now with the issues in our government, but also the fact that he's just got, like you said, Southern. Very religious, and also just that aspect of representing his community as well too. So all 4 stories just really, everyone, you've got to watch these. It really just gives you an amazing insight into the trans community that I don't think a lot of people can say they've seen or get to see on any kind of social platform or any other platform. And thank God for something like Reverie.tv that's giving us these access to queer content. It really shows us more about our community, and the fact that it's and I love the fact that you specifically went out and got someone that wasn't here in Chicago or here in New York or here in LA. You went to somewhere that really showed someone struggling and not being able to have access to this entire community of people and resources. They had to go out and struggle. They had to go out and fight. They had to go find these things. And it's really beautiful to see how they took a negative situation and how they've been basically owning that shit and making it their bitch, basically, and taking in just the things that come out in such a positive way. Even though some of these stories are very sad and there's some of it's just so heart-wrenching, there's so much positivity and light at the end of this too, of seeing it's not what it's not keeping them down, it's not making them give up. They're fighting, they are doing everything they can to be them and to live and to help everyone else do the same. So I'm so amazed by this project that you've done, Andre, and it's for anyone who has not been a producer, it's not fucking easy at all. You said right around 2015 you started this project. So it's been roughly 3.5 years, 3 years ish on everything together. A lot of work goes into something like this, not just just putting things together, meeting people, recording, editing is just a bitch. For anyone who's done editing, it sucks. So just really, it's amazing to have something like this, and I'm so grateful that you were able to kind of put this out there. It just came out on the 29th, I believe, just this last week, just before March 31st for Transgender Day of Visibility, which was kind of nice little plug right there for that too, which was great. And really, what was when it came out and everything was done, what was your initial reaction? Were you just huge sigh of relief, or did you pass out? What was your initial reaction once everything was done and was up on Reverie and it was live for people to see?
Well, I am a little bit of an overachiever, and so in addition to it coming out, we also organized over 40 screenings around the country.
Wow.
With community partners, and in a lot of places that are sort of that aren't major cities.
Right.
So, we had partners in Galveston, Texas, and Missoula, Montana, and 2 in Kentucky. So that was probably one of our more popular screenings was in Lexington, Kentucky. So,
wow.
So yeah, that was so as soon as it came out, I just continued to hammer at these screenings, trying to support all these community partners who were incredible, who really showed out. And now I'm doing a speaking engagement tomorrow at Stanford, and we're doing more screenings. I'm on the road. We're going to be at Northwestern University in Chicago. We're doing a screening with Keeping It Light in Chicago. And we're also going to go to Temple University and do something with Trans Faith on the 15th, I think. So so the next couple of weeks, it's just trying to get the word out, trying to get people to share. You can go on Facebook and go to America in Transition if you want to stay in contact with us. And you can know about screenings near you, or if you want to host a screening or a workshop, that's been a really enriching part of what we've been doing, is being able to really connect with communities and help drive these conversations and support people in thinking through, how do I be an ally in my school, in my workplace, so I slept probably like 13 hours, and then I woke up and was late for a screening in Oakland. And so I'm just kind of
since.
I haven't slept since. So I apologize for any twitching.
No, it's great. And again, that's the thing. Nothing's gonna get done unless you're gonna put in the work to get it done. And you are fucking working it. So it's amazing to see. The project's so great. It's at America in Transition across the board, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So you can go follow them on there and get all the information about what they're going to be up to. Like you said, just make sure you can check that out, so that way you want to see any screenings, or if you would like to do a screening, go and contact them. And I think it's just americaintransition.org, correct?
Yes.
The website as well. So you can go check them online. Also go to reverie.tv.
Feel free to...
Sorry.
Oh, I also just want to put it out there. I moved to the West Coast recently, and people talk about manifesting. So I just want to put it, if anyone wants to shower us with money and resources, you can also, there's a donate button. If you would like to fund a season 2, I have a lot of ideas. I'd love to do trans people of faith. I'd love to share a trans family, like really going into like a trans poly family with multiple trans folks involved. And we'd love to feature more like trans artists. So if folks want to get behind a season 2, I'd love to talk to any producers or broadcasters. And I also have a podcast pitch. So come talk to me if you want to collaborate in making stuff, to support the trans community. So
awesome. Well, definitely go to americaintransition.org to help support, because everything helps. Every little bit counts, and this shit ain't cheap. So this is a labor of love, but it also is a labor of love that needs money. So do what you can, ladies and gentlemen, and really just help support our community as much as possible, because really it is, without people understanding how we all are and operate, we can't get the rest of the world to kind of get on board and understand that we are normal just like anyone else and everyone else. And these stories are amazing. They're beautiful. They will probably make you burst into tears, because I almost teared up like a few times and almost bawled my eyes out. So, but it is great. I hope to see season 2 here within the next year, hopefully, or a couple of years. Never know. We'll see. We'll keep in touch with Andre to make sure. But thank you so much, Andre, for taking the time today to speak with us and really share your amazing project and the love you and work you put into this. It's absolutely amazing, and congratulations on an amazing job. Like, it's like, woo, that is not easy. So thank you so much for being a guest on the show. It was a pleasure having you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for your thoughtful questions. And thank you for, helping me reach more people. So, I think to me, it's about like, how do we support each other? How do we create, a culture of like support within our communities? And I will say, like, so often, sometimes we can kind of tear each other down, or you know, so I really appreciate having space to really lift one another up. So thank you so much.
And then again, that's the goal. What I want to do here, I want everyone to know and help. And again, is that we need to work together, because only by working together can we affect change and successfully affect change, and not just our community, but in the world, and to the people and communities outside of our own. So thank you again, Andre, and also thank you to GayLifeLA.com and to Training Mate, the weekly sponsor at TrainingMate.com as well. We will be coming to you guys next week, but thank you so much. We'll catch you later, and bye, everyone. Okay, I'm going to stop the broadcast now.